Today we're going to have a look at something special because Franklin-Christoph now sells flex nibs, and flex is what makes the world go round in the fountain pen world, so I was very excited to try these out, and Scott Franklin was kind enough to send over two of these flex nibs. One is the regular flex nib, and the other is their stub italic gradient SIG nib, which is a nib they do in-house, and in the past I have provided false information about that. My apologies. I thought it was supposed to give different sort of line widths at different nib angles, but that's not what it does. So I'm very sorry for misinforming you. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. So these nibs are designed, as I understand it, so that no matter what angle you write under, you always get that sort of line variation that an italic nib offers you, but it's a bit smoother than a traditional crisp italic is. Those can cut into the corners, you know, the nib corners can cut into the paper when you write. So it's interesting. People have different ways to hold a pen. So if you want that line variation that an italic offers, but you don't want to have, you're a bit picky to your writing angle, or you have issues with that, you can always get something like this. I'm not going to review the pens these nibs are on. These are just Model 66 antique glass pens. I have reviewed the model and I have reviewed the finish before, so I don't want to repeat myself and waste your time. Let's focus on the meat, the beef, the juice, which is the nibs. These are interesting nibs, and I like them both, and they're not vintage flex. So let's get that straight out of the way. Everybody wants vintage flex. Nobody can do it. None of the modern makers, whether it's Extra Flexibile by Omas, whether it's Aurora with their new flex nib, or whether it's these nibs, none of them are vintage flex. End of story. But that doesn't mean they're not nice nibs to use. They're that they aren't nice nibs to use. Let's have a look at these nibs. What makes them so special? What makes them special is right there. It's that cutout, right? That allows the nib to flex more, and as a result to provide line variation. This is a number 6 nib. They are not cheap, but the question is, are they worth the money? First of all, I really like this effect. You can look through the feed because of those cutouts. It's kind of neat. I like them. I think these are very nice nibs, and even though they're not vintage flex, they definitely flex. Doesn't mean they're not without problems, but they are very nice. First of all, that SIG nib is very nice. Of the two, that's probably my favorite. So if you were to get one, I would recommend that. It's very smooth, it's nice and juicy, it's clearly well ground. So what do you call that? Props to that. It's very well done, and I would heartily recommend it. How do they perform? That's what you want to know. Of course, I'm going to show you a writing sample so you can actually see, but just to try and put it in words. Very solid semi-flex nibs, maybe a little bit more than that. Not vintage, but definitely nice line variation, which I think is great. Good flow. For me, that SIG nib seems to flow a little bit better than the standard round nib, but both are very nice. An issue I ran into is that if you push down hard on the nib as you write, it separates from the feed, and it's easy to push back, but once that happens, you create that gap, ink flow is hampered, and the nib won't write anymore. The nibs railroad and run dry if you really flex them pretty hard, and it seemed to me to be especially the round nib that had that issue, the SIG nib a little less so. But if you sort of modulate your writing speed a little bit, you can definitely get a nice flow out of that, and you shouldn't run into too much railroading. Use a nice wet ink, etc., not paper that's not too absorbent, and that should work. So I was actually quite impressed. I was more impressed by these nibs than I was by Aurora's new flex nib, which is sold for considerably more money. So I think it's very nice to have this option, and I would definitely consider it if you were to buy a Franklin-Christoph pen. More than enough talk. A very kind thank you again to Scott Franklin for sending the nibs over. I really appreciate it. We need to see it in action. High resolution pictures will be on the website, but let's see how it writes. I hope this was useful so far, and I'm glad to see you later. Bye bye. Okay, so here we go with these Franklin-Christoph Flex nibs. Again, I thought this might be a nice moment to show you a little bit of a close-up of that nib. The camera can handle it. You can do it. Okay. Definitely interesting, those cutouts. Now, let's do some writing. I'll try to show you both nibs. This is the round flex, so I'm just going to put in R flex. I'm not flexing it right now. It's also a Franklin-Christoph ink. Fairly wet writer, which is nice. Paper is rhodia. Now let's look at this flexibility. There we go. Now, here's the thing. I pushed that pretty hard on purpose. And as you can see, the nib and feed have become separated, and that hampers ink flow, so no more writing is possible. Easy fix. Just put it upside down, gently touch it to the paper, and as you can see, that gap closes again. So by no means is permanent damage done, but if you really start to push it hard, that's what you can expect to happen. Some nice line variation is to be had by all of this, but again, it's not vintage flex. If you really want to, you can also do reverse writing. Now, let's have a look at that other nib, which I found even more interesting. Here we have the Franklin-Christoph stub italic gradient, and the stub italic gradient I find a lot more interesting. First of all, without any pressure, you definitely get line variation, and as you can see, kind of irrespective of your angle of writing. Writing is very smooth. Okay, can't talk and write at the same time. The quick, very smooth dog jumps over things. Smooth, nice bit of line variation, which can really benefit your handwriting. It's kind of called the poor man's calligraphy. Even if you don't know how to do calligraphy, just by using an italic nib you can make your handwriting look pretty neat, which is fun. Now, what about this flexibility? Again, wet writer, that for sure, but what about the line variation? As I said, I found this nib to be a bit wetter than the other one, and you see it just keeps going and going and going. Now this pen too, or this nib too I should say, can be made to railroad for sure. Sorry about the bad handwriting, I'm really just trying to maximize the line variation that you can see here. So there is definitely line variation to be had, which I think is very pleasant. So again, were I to suggest one of these nibs, I would go for this nib. I think it's just a very pleasant nib to use. And that's all there's to it. So, a very kind thank you to Scott Franklin for sending me the nibs. I appreciate it. I hope this was useful. I hope this has given you some insight in these nibs. And I'll gladly see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.